Welcome to Bad First Impression, the podcast that was about movies and where we meet them. It kind of still is. We're going to get into that in a moment. First off, I want to say, for the first time I have not just a guest, but a co-host returning to the show.
Hi.
Should I intro you or do you?
I've
only ever introed you. I guess here's the thing. Do you want to introduce yourself as a co-host, or do you want me to continue introducing you? That's the first order of business.
What?
Like, normally I say, today my guest is so-and-so.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
You're not technically a guest, though.
No.
You're co-hosting this.
True.
Do you want to introduce yourself to signify that change, or would you prefer that I still introduce you?
You can do it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll introduce you. No, it's good. These are important orders of business. I am your I'm also a co-host. I am your co-host, Devin Warner. With me, returning to the show, KeriAnn Eng, also a co-host. We're equal co-hosts. We'll get into the minutia of what that means momentarily, but I want to talk a little bit about some changes that we have coming to the show. So for those of you who are new, Bad First Impression started out as a repertory film podcast where I would just pair an upcoming rep screening kind of with no rhyme or reason. I would just be like, hey, you like this? Or hey, I think you might like this, to the guest. And we would go to a screening and we would talk about the movie and the theater and the people who showed up to that screening.
The experience of getting to the theater.
The experience of getting to the theater in the case of one episode that we did that, again, we will touch on in more detail momentarily. And the original goal there was kind of to talk about how the way that we come in contact with the movie, how that affects our opinion of it. The most common example is like, oh, I watched something at home and I feel like I didn't really get the full experience of it. So the logic being like, oh, well, the best case for most movies is to go to a theater and get the full experience. And frankly, the reason why we're moving away from that premise is because most rep screenings are one-night only showings. And it was becoming really prohibitive to people who wanted to be on the show who would say, I would love to do it, and I'd actually love to talk about that movie, but I can't get that far away, or I can't be there that night, or I'm out of town, or whatever. And it was just, as much as I loved talking about the local New York stuff, it was getting in the way of doing episodes that people were movies people were passionate about. You infamously first came on when I pitched you, because you're from Staten Island.
Mm-hmm.
I pitched you all 3 of the Lord of the Rings extended editions are playing, but they're sold out everywhere except for the Staten Island Alamo.
Yeah.
So we went and watched
on Mondays at 2 p.m.
I know. We went and watched.
I wonder why it wasn't sold out.
We went and watched afternoon matinees of 4-hour movies after 3-hour commutes one way. And it was fun. No, it wasn't fun. It was a pain in the ass. It was annoying.
Yeah. I was also coming from my 5 a.m. shift.
I know,
so it was a little rough.
I know.
It was a little rough.
I know. So it was a big ask. And then we finally sat down to the episode. And that episode, which I think is funny because we're so loopy on it, but that episode is primarily about taking the bus to Staten Island and being frustrated that we don't have the space to actually talk about any of the movies that we traveled to go see, sat and watched for 4 hours, and quite enjoyed, by the way. It's not like not like we were like, oh, it was a waste of time. I think we both walked away like, I like those movies and I'm glad I got to see them in a theater, even if getting there was kind of a pain in the ass. Since we've left behind the theater thing, I've been on kind of a run of episodes where I will ask the guest to do kind of a guest choice. I'll say I went back to the premise of Bad First Impression. I say, what's a movie that you think has unfairly a bad first impression, right? It's something that you like or want to defend an aspect of, even if not the whole thing, that you think people are kind of unfairly mean to. And that has led me down this road where I'm looking at movies that people are really passionate about and have all these interesting things to say and want to make points about them, and then I can only talk about them for a week. You know, like that's the thing, is that like the format of the show has kind of limited me um, in really doing the deep dives that most of these people who, like the guests we've had on, are really passionate about, or I just independently become interested in an aspect of them. So I started thinking about ways that I can kind of do deeper dives on it. And I went back to this episode that you and I went and did, wherein I think towards the end of it, we kind of pitch, what if we just did all the Lord of the Rings? At the time, I think we were like, we'll just keep doing the theatrical thing, but then we'll just like maybe once a month we'll release, or we're going to talk about each one of the movies. And then that that kind of like just took a back burner while I was in production on regular episodes. And you would like ask me about it once, or like, hey, are we still doing this?
Yeah.
And I kind of, knowing that the show needed a bit of a change, threw it out to you. I said, would you want to just co-host this with me? Like, would you want to just do this series with me? I don't know. What were your thoughts when I initially asked you this?
I thought we were gonna do like once a month. We were gonna do an episode because we had already, technically, we had seen each of the movies in theaters already.
We had, yeah.
So it wouldn't be like we were lying.
Yeah, you're right. I think that like you very rationally were like, I don't want to just like I thought we would just do an episode on each one of these movies, basically.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And I think that was a totally normal like thing to expect from what I had sold you on initially. And we have this like 2-hour episode that is mostly us being like, shit, we don't have time to like get into the Helm's Deep. We don't have time to do any of this. And so I was like, let's just give each movie the room to breathe, basically, right? And then over the course of doing these episodes for a couple weeks, kind of start to go back to the original themes of the episode, discuss, because there are good movies and there are bad movies in this series, discuss how your ongoing relationship with not just a movie, but like a series of movies changes the context in which you watch them. Obviously, we're not going to be seeing all these theatrically. I don't know that we'll have the opportunity to watch any of the ones theatrically as we're covering them this time, but we'll have past experiences to draw on. So that's kind of why I want to do a deep dive, and I've actually started thinking up other deep dives that I have some other, like, you won't be on for every series, but I have like some co-hosts that I have lined up with some other projects. So we'll just kind of have like people rotating in and out to, instead of just like doing 1 week where we're like, we're going to just do a deep dive on this thing, we'll really have time to like delve into the nitty-gritty of like a subsection of movies, basically. And it won't always be series. We have some that are like, it's all in relation to the same director, or maybe these all have like the way they were produced has something, in common with each other, or they have something like thematically in common. But we're starting here because I think this is like an approachable place for people to jump on, and also for us to kind of like test this out a little bit. I really do feel like there's a lot of passion for these movies. I actually don't have much of a history with them. I had only seen Fellowship when we went and did that episode previously. And so,
what?
Yeah, you didn't know that?
No.
I had only seen Fellowship. I'd actually seen Fellowship, the theatrical edition, in a theater like a year or two prior at the at the dearly departed Cinepolis down in Chelsea.
Oh, actually, I think you did mention that. Yeah.
I had never seen Two Towers or Return of the King, and even though I was like an adult and could have gone, I didn't care about the Hobbit movies. One, because I didn't have the relationship to the original material, and two, I wasn't exactly hearing great things about them. So I've kind of just not really engaged with this weird, like, huge cultural thing, except for during the pandemic, I read the books. That's my extension with it. But even though I'm somebody who likes a lot of fantasy, there's no stickiness to these names in my brain. Does that make sense? Like, if you like talk to me about character names or like battles, I, for whatever reason, cannot remember the stuff in this franchise specifically. And I can't really tell you why, because I'm normally pretty good at this sort of thing.
I mean, one of the things is also, like, annoyingly, a lot of the names are similar for very different characters.
And you can tell the original idea is that it's a joke, that they're all kind of similar, right? Yeah. But the way that people get obsessive about this thing means that oh no, now they get like retroactively applied being like real individual characters to themselves, and you have to kind of make sense of them. So that's another part of the reason why you're here, I think, because you do have a lifelong relationship to these movies and to this franchise as a whole. Um, and I'm hoping that you can like provide some guardrails because like otherwise I'm afraid I'm going to get yelled at for getting things wrong or for skipping over plot points and instead just like talking about like style or like how the movies were produced.
Well, I mean, I will start with I am not an expert on this fandom. Like
No, 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 no,
I didn't learn
but no, but
Elvish. I don't know
you,
all the lore. I didn't read the Silmarillion.
well,
Like all
because I
that.
wouldn't be talking to you if that were the case. Like, and nobody would be talking to you if that were
Damn.
the
All
case.
right.
No, no, no. I think that we never, even when we have people on here who know a lot about a subject, we never on this show ever be like, we're an authority on this. And I don't necessarily want to create that vibe around a show either, that there has to be this expectation of like, you have to be a Lord of the Rings genius to be on here. I just think you know more than me and you know enough to make sure that like I said, we don't go through a Two Towers episode without ever addressing Helm's Deep. Like you, like I don't want to like get to the end. And you're like, so we didn't talk about that at all.
Well, I mean, you also know that Two Towers is my favorite. So
Two Towers is your favorite. So yeah, exactly. You'll keep that one on rails, hopefully. Um, but yeah, I want to kind of dig deep on something. I felt like this was a good place to do it because it's one where like I obviously have some knowledge having read it. I just restarted listening. I'm not gonna I wasn't going to read them again in physical form. I was going to do them as audiobooks, which Andy Serkis narrates. And he like does so with I just started The Hobbit and there's a lot of singing in that and he's like with like gusto and he's really really singing. So it's a fun time. So I recommend for anybody who wants to follow along with those. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of the reason behind why we're switching what to expect moving forward. Actually, we're just going to go ahead and do a rundown and we'll publish this as a written list too of what we're actually going to cover because we're not just doing the well-known Peter Jackson movies. So I'll go down what we're covering. Next week, we're starting with Rankin Bass's 1977 animated TV movie adaptation, The Hobbit, a movie that I did not know existed until like a couple weeks ago when I started doing precursory research for this.
I had heard of it, but I never watched it.
Yeah, we've watched it. We're actually recording that episode right after this, so hopefully, next week you guys enjoy us breaking that one down. Next week, the following week, the 1978's The Lord of the Rings, directed by Ralph Bakshi, movie directed by a weird X-rated cartoonist that adapts the first and I believe kind of like half of the second book in the series because it was proposed as like they were going to adapt the whole Lord of the Rings in 2 movies, and then they were just like, we're just not going to make the second movie.
Whack.
I know it's weird. I'm excited to watch that one actually because I've heard about it for a long time, and we'll spoil it now. We have, uh, perpetual resident of this podcast, Alex Campo, coming on to do that, and shocker alert, that guy loves Ralph Bakshi. We have after that, Rankin Bass takes the rights back and does an adaptation of just The Return of the King, also a TV movie. We'll get into that a little bit more on this later episode. I don't want to spoil too much of like the weird context of how those movies make this misshapen trilogy. After that, then we're finally going to jump into the Peter Jackson movie. So we'll do Fellowship of the Rings, Two Towers, and 2003's The Return of the King. Not the 1980. We're not going to do 2 episodes on the 1980 TV movie.
What if we just did? You think anyone would notice?
I think people would be really mad at me. It would be really funny to like that day just republish this, like not even like record a second episode where we talk about the 1980, just republish it again. And just like wait a day and then the next day and be like, psych. I think all the subscribers will go down to 0. I think they're like, we could abide one of these episodes.
I think it'd be funny.
Maybe we'll do that. I don't know. Maybe you guys have that coming in 6 weeks. We'll never know until, I guess we will know in 6 weeks whether or not that happens. And then we're going to dive into the Hobbit movies. So that's An Unexpected Journey, The Desolation of Smaug, and The Battle of the Five Armies. Now that we're at the end of listing the Peter Jackson movies, are we advising people who want to watch along, should they watch the extended cuts, or are we primarily basing our conversation around the theatrical.
I will be rewatching the extended cuts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Are you going to?
My plan was in the next coming weeks, like when we still have several weeks out from when we actually record the episodes, or like record like the podcast for those movies. I was hopefully over the next 2 weeks going to watch the extended cuts of both trilogies. And then when we get closer to, I was then going to watch the theatrical. So I can kind of have a mind for what gets cut at. Like instead of being like, oh, let's see what gets added in, I'd kind of like to see what ends up getting cut out, or what didn't make the initial cut. And then I can have it fresh in my mind when I record. So I guess preemptively now we're saying spoilers for the extended cuts, right? Like we're going to discuss the context of them, even if like the episode isn't specifically covering the extended cut of them.
Yeah.
And for me, that includes The Hobbit. I don't know if you are going to want to watch those movies twice. We'll see, basically. I don't know. I'm imagining what'll probably happen is like in the next week or so, you might watch like the extended Unexpected Journey and be like, guess what? I'm not doing this 2 more times.
Well, the Unexpected Journey is the best of the 3. I think I also just give it a bad rap in my mind because I hated the 3rd one so much.
Yeah. I think
I kind of pushed it out of my mind for a long time that I kind of forgot what actually happens in them up until I watched The Hobbit from 77. And I didn't hate the first 2, but the 3rd one just ruined everything for me.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that when we get, when we get to the end of that.
And I also think while we were watching the extended versions in theaters, it was hard for me to distinguish which parts were the extended parts. Like I had some theories, but I think it says a lot for the writing as well. Every single scene had a very specific purpose, and everything pushed the story along, except for a couple of extended parts of Return of the King that were just funny. So I couldn't really tell too much which parts were added and taken out.
The extended edition of those movies are like I quite enjoy them in their like extent. Like it's kind of nice to just luxuriate and like I can just sit here and let this movie wash over me for hours and hours, and I really like that about those. But they are, as a traditional narrative, they're like saggy. Like there is a point in the middle of all of them, even if you're enjoying it, where you're like, this is a lot. And if you know the stories, you're like, there's a lot more too.
Yeah.
So I'm not dreading it or anything, but especially with the original trilogy, because I believe there's more of a difference between the extended and the theatrical in the case of those. I think with the Hobbits, they might like add just a little bit, although I don't know, I might be wrong. I'm going to have to do some research on that one.
I have no idea.
That's the thing is those I know they exist because people will buy them. People like this franchise so much that even if you sell extended versions of the movies that people don't like, people will still, like be interested and want to buy them. What else we got going on here? Oh yeah, so then we are actually like there is more to cover after that. So we are going to do an episode on the first season of The Rings of Power, the Amazon show that weirdly has no cultural footprint whatsoever. It's really weird. People were clamoring for it, and then it came out, and I've never once had a person like talk to me about it.
I watched the first episode before we recorded.
And we were like,
I already have opinions about it.
You do or don't?
I do.
Okay.
They're not like bad and they're not good. They're just opinions.
Yeah. So those are 8 episode seasons, I think. So they're not crazy long. Season 1 is out now. Season 2, I think, is actually starting in a couple weeks from when we're recording this. I believe I had timed it out on my calendar. We are also going to do an episode on season 2 2 weeks after season 1, because that's when the final episode will have been out for a week. We'll have had a chance to record something. People have had a chance to watch it. In between those, we have a kind of fun little bonus that, like, if you've listened to our previous episode, you will know what it's going to be. For the longest time, this was a repertory.
I'm so excited.
I'm excited for this too. When this was a repertory screening podcast, I would end every episode by saying, like, what's a movie that's probably not going to screen somewhere that if it was, you would want to go see it. And as we had been in our like loopy, barely lucid state, for some reason went on like multiple extended riffs about Quest for Camelot, the Warner Animation Group animated like bomb from the 90s.
It wasn't a bomb.
It lost a lot of money. Yeah. And you cited that as like, I'm going to prove you wrong, motherfucker. We're going to go watch that if it ever comes back. So lo and behold, right around the time we are finishing this series, Quest for Camelot is showing at a Friday at noon screening at an Alamo in a series they're calling Kids Camp for kids who are out of school. So during school hours, they can go see like animated movies, kids movies, that sort of thing.
People are gonna think we're so weird for being there.
We're gonna be really weird. I'm gonna maybe try and get Lily to come with us that day so that we can.
Yeah, that'll make it better.
I feel like 2 is like, what's wrong with you people? 3 is like, at least there's a group of people that all have the same thing wrong with them. So we're gonna go. Okay. We're gonna go do that, and there is actually a connection. Quest for Camelot is based off a book by the author Vera Chapman, who was part of the Tolkien Society, which was like a bunch of writers who all like worked together and critiqued each other's work. So there is some connection to the Lord of the Rings, aside from the fact that it's also a fantasy movie.
But I didn't even know there was a book until you told me.
I learned all this recently. As I told you before, my exposure to this movie was primarily through the Game Boy Color game, which I'll actually probably be working my way through because it's on Switch now. It's weirdly like they just put it on Switch for free.
See, I didn't know there was anything besides the movie.
Yeah, I think most people didn't even know there was the movie. But it works out. It works out nicely. It works out nicely because we have this like weird little week to fill between Rings of Power finishing up, and I feel like that's worth covering. I feel like what we'll do probably. Because I want to talk about what this means moving forward. We'll cover season 1, and we'll definitely cover season 2 because it's new and ongoing. And at the end of that episode, I think we should sit down and be like, are we going to cover any more of this show? You know what I mean? Like, depending on how season 2 is, because I assume Amazon buys things like seasons at a time. But we'll maybe sit down and figure out, like, do we want to do an episode down the road, in a year or two, whenever it finishes? Would we even want to do a Rings of Power season 3 episode? So I guess we'll decide after we've watched 2 seasons of the show.
We could do that live on the podcast, decide.
Yeah, I actually think that will probably be how it mostly shakes down. Speaking of what's on the horizon, there is actually, and like footage of it just dropped for the first time, like literally today, the day we're recording, there's a Lord of the Rings anime film scheduled to come out at the end of this year called War of the Rohirrim. The stills, it honestly looks really cool. It's got that kind of like hyper gloss look to it where like it doesn't really look like traditional anime. Like it looks very expensive.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. We will be covering that. I think it comes out either late November or sometime in December. So we'll do an episode. We'll be on to other things, but KeriAnn will come back and we'll do an episode on that when that happens. And I don't know if you know this, there is actually a scheduled live-action Lord of the Rings movie coming. Do you know about this?
No.
So Andy Serkis, who plays Gollum, and who's a director in his own right, is going to direct a movie called, I shit you not, The Hunt for Gollum. I actually
Who's hunting for Gollum?
These are the questions. Like, I don't know if this is, like, prior or if it's in between, but like I truly don't know what this is happening. All I know is Andy Serkis is directing it, and he's presumably going to be motion capturing for Gollum. It'd be really funny if he didn't do that.
I would be so mad, honestly.
Yeah. I actually saw a really funny quote from Ian McKellen, who, for reference, is 85. He gave an interview like the other day where he's like, yeah, I would happily come back and I would play Gandalf again, if I'm alive. Like that's just the way he said it. Nobody else was saying like, oh, you're going to die soon. He's just like, I don't know. But I love the ominous way he'd be like, of course, if I'm alive. Like that's, I can't do a McKellen. I guess we'll learn that over the course of these episodes. And then, yeah, the other thing we might potentially come back for that we know of right now is theoretically Rings of Power Season 3, if Seasons 1 and 2 are good / interesting enough to feel like we need to talk about them. Do you have anything else to add right now? Because it's just like a little mini-sode. We're just throwing this one out the week before the series starts to give people the download, to give them the chance to maybe this is the next movie we're covering is 77 minutes long. Like you can definitely make time for it this week so you can get ahead. Anything else you want to throw out about what we're do you have any like aspirations for this series moving forward? Like, do you hope to learn or change your mind on anything in particular?
I'm excited about the guests we're gonna have because I don't know like what their relationships with the movies are as well.
We have at least one person who's never seen a Lord of the Rings movie.
That one I'm very excited for.
That one I'll be very excited for, and the one we paired her with, I think, is going to be really fun.
I think also, it's not even like the first one.
I know, it's really funny. I guess like mild spoiler, I don't want to like say who the person is. Mild spoiler, we had somebody who we've been wanting to get on for a while who said, I don't have any relationship to Lord of the Rings. I would just trust your recommendation. I said, what if we watched the least essential one together and then just tried to get out of that what we could? And so that's what we're doing. Everyone can guess what the least essential movie in this series is going to be.
Do you think she's going to watch the other ones?
I severely doubt it.
She's just going to watch out of context just that movie.
I just don't see that happening. We have people who are really passionate about things, not necessarily just the movies themselves, but like things related to the movies. We have people who are just kind of like obsessives about it, like who might actually be able to like school you and me on like, well, this is actually what happens, and this is what matters, and this is what it means, for everything. And I think it'll just be a really fun time to go through. Honestly, I am looking for. I'll say this: watching the 1977 Hobbit. I was seeing the scenes in there, and I'm like, I know that the Hobbit movies are probably not going to be good. Like, I've only heard that they're bad. I'm, like, weirdly excited to see these scenes actually given space. I might regret that later when I see them given too much space. But, I guess we will go ahead and see, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's it for this week. We're gonna go ahead and just end on a reminder that next week we are covering the 1977 animated The Hobbit, which you and I are gonna record that episode basically right after we finish this. As always, this has been Bad First Impression. You can follow the show at BFI Pod on all socials. You can follow us on YouTube. You can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. If you have any questions or if you have any suggestions for things for us to kind of cover or to talk about, or if you have a question that you'd like us to read on the air, feel free to write us in at mailbag@bfipod.com. I've been your co-host, Devin Warner. You can find me on any socials at WhatIfDevin. KeriAnn, do you want to plug anything on your way out?
My socials for Instagram is killer_Keri, KERI.
Yes. Good handle.
Not that I really post anything, but
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Same. It's mostly just like what books am I reading / cross posts from the Bad First Impression page. That's most of what my social is.
I just post concerts, and I haven't even done that in a while. I'm like really behind on that. But
you're literally going to a concert tonight. Like you're rectifying the situation immediately.
Yes,
after
but
you
will
walk
I post about it? I don't know.
Maybe
Eventually, probably.
I went to a concert a couple weeks ago that I loved, and I ended up I got like good videos too, and I just didn't post any of them. Yeah. I think because
Instagram is a lot of work.
I like having. It was my experience. I paid for. I know this sounds selfish. I paid for the ticket. Now it's my experience. I'm going to secrete the experience. We don't have a movie to quote on the way out. We normally end every episode with a quote from the movie. What should we do here as we exit this episode? And as always, until next time, bye y'all.